Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. Welcome to my Christmas festive video for 2021. And this year I thought I would feature a special guest, Richard McCook. Hello, Richard.
How you doing, James?
I'm very well, thank you. Compliments of the season to you.
And to you and your family as well.
Good stuff, yeah. Okay, well, today we're going to do a video and we're going to be looking at a particular theme which I dreamt up the other night. And it's all to do with favorite albums versus famous albums. Now, this is where a band or an artist has a particular album which is known as their magnum opus. It's the critical favorite. It's the one that always tops lists, critics lists. If you buy one of those books, those 1,000 albums to hear before you die, and you look up the particular artist, it'll be that one rather than any other one. So what Richard and I are going to do today, we're going to whiz through some favorite albums which are not the famous ones. And just speaking for myself, Richard, when I show one of my favorite albums, I'm not necessarily saying I definitely prefer it to the famous one. I'm just saying in some cases that the one I'm going to show is it's more of a go-to album for me. Maybe because the famous one is a bit played out, it's been heard too many times, it's the obvious choice. Does that accord with your take
More or
on
less, it's my go-to as well. And I think some of these are slightly underrated as well with the critics. So it's a bit of go-to and a bit of underrated, and it's highly rated with me.
Yeah, that occurred to me too, that is this just another way of doing a video about underrated albums? And it probably is in a way, but I thought it would be interesting. In my case, I'm not sure if you're going to do this, I'm going to show the albums in pairs. So I'm going to show the famous one and then I'm going to show the favorite one.
No, I'm just going to show the underrated album. That's with me. I may talk about a different album, or the one before or the one after.
Okay. Well, I'll go first because I'll show the record that gave me the idea for the video.
Okay.
So when Christmas comes around, I always tend to play certain albums and certain artists. I always get the ABBA out. I always get, certain things out. And I always like to have a little bit of Bee Gees at Christmas. So I gave this a bit of a spin. Not all of it, just the great tracks from it. Then I dug this one out, and this is Main Course by the Bee Gees. And again, I was struck just by how brilliant this album is when I put it on. It's kind of like, the Bee Gees clearly have a great period in the 60s, and then you've got the 1970s stuff, which sort of builds up to Saturday Night Fever, doesn't it? And when you get to Saturday Night Fever, the stuff they were doing was quite bombastic. It was quite, not overproduced exactly, but it was definitely very slick, very widescreen, very panoramic. But what I love about this record, which came out a few years earlier, I'm thinking 1975, it's still got a bit of a club vibe to it. So you've got the kind of jive talking sound. It's just got a bit of a kind of New York, almost greasy kind of club sound. And it's a bit less over the top, a bit more stripped back, a bit more minimal. And I just don't think this album gets the attention it deserves as a record, as an LP.
Do you not think that it's got a bit of everything on it? It's got a bit of late 60s Bee Gees. There's a little bit of country in there with the song Come On Over that Olivia Newton-John had a hit with America.
Yeah,
or
definitely.
in America with. And apparently the song Jive Talking, they sent that off to radio stations in America, but they didn't put their name on it because if they'd had, it would never have got played.
Okay.
And so the radio stations were playing this song Jive Talk, and they had no idea who it was. They didn't think it was those old fuddy-duddies, the Bee Gees that had, How'd You Mend a Broken Heart, I think was their last big hit in America. But it just took off, it really did. And half of that album itself, I think, is very R&B, but the rest of it could be spread out throughout between 67 and 74 period.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is very diverse. Side 2 has got less of the disco stuff on it. It's not exactly disco, is it? It's more like R&B, really.
It is R&B, yeah.
But I think, given how massive Saturday Night Fever was, I just think this album is the one that arguably starts to lay the groundwork for that sound. And it's not, like I said, it's not particularly a record which gets a huge amount of attention. Main Course by the Bee Gees, people talk about Odessa, they talk about Saturday Night Fever, they talk about Idea and Trafalgar and all the early stuff. This one I don't think gets...
That is my favorite Bee Gees album of the lot. That's my number one. So it is. Okay, well, my first choice is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it's from 1987, and it's Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. And this is the one that everyone thinks is dated in sound. It's not. There's one track on it called Runaway Trains, which is very dated. It happens to be the very best song on the album. In fact, it's one of the best songs altogether. The single Jammin' Me, there's two singles off this, Jammin' Me and All Mixed Up, I think are two magnificent songs. Jammin' Me is just a really good rocker. It's got a co-write with Bob Dylan. All Mixed Up has got horns in it, and it's almost like a follow-up to Don't Come Around Here No More from the previous album. Really good song. It's just an excellent album with lots of little rockabilly type songs on it as well. Like there's a few songs on here like Think About Me, which could have fallen on the Full Moon Fever album without a shadow of a doubt. Wonderful. And my favourite, along with Runaway Trains, is a track called How Many More Days, which fades in and fades out. And during the chorus, there's a few notes of piano, which I think are magnificent. It just makes the whole song absolutely brilliant. And this is up there in my top 3 Tom Petty albums. And mostly, if you ever see Tom Petty ranking videos, it's usually in the bottom 3. So,
what would you say, if that's the favourite, what would you say the famous one is? What's the one that everybody talks about?
Full Moon Fever is the big one, and it came after this. So it is. Even Southern Accents before this gets a lot more credit, which I just don't rate at all. Yeah. The other big one would be Damn the Torpedoes from 1979.
Okay.
And then Wildflowers again from 1994. So yeah, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. Love it.
That's an interesting choice because we may well find that Tom Petty features in my list as well a bit later.
Right. I didn't know you had any Tom Petty albums.
Yeah, I've got most of them. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
But I've got a very particular entry point with Tom Petty, which makes my Tom Petty appreciation perhaps a bit unorthodox. But I mean, we'll see. Okay, fantastic. Now, the next two, Richard, I don't think you're going to have heard these records, and I don't think you're going to be particularly into this artist, but I wanted to feature this because to me, this absolutely nails what it's all about. And sometimes I think you can discover the favourite album before you've heard the famous one. And then when you finally hear the famous one, you can hear why it's famous, but you still will always gravitate towards the one that you heard first. And in my case, so we're talking about this artist, David Lee Roth, Eat 'em and Smile. Now, this is known as his masterpiece. This is known as the really big album which totally broke him as a solo star. It's absolutely legendary. All the Diamond Dave fans loved it back in the day. I, unfortunately, was totally unaware of David Lee Roth when that album came out. So this was the one that I heard first. And this is one which is not particularly loved anymore, I don't think. This is Skyscraper. Now, have you heard the single from this, Another Day in Paradise?
I'm not aware of it. I may know it if I heard it, but I'm not aware.
Now, I'm not going to sit here now and argue that this is a great classic album, but it's an album that meant a huge amount to me when I was 16. And it's a very diverse album. I think the reason why people still prefer Eat 'em and Smile is that one was more of a kind of hard rock album, really. It was Diamond Dave truly trying to set out his stall as a hard rock artist. This one is just this ridiculous sort of over-the-top mixture of hard rock, pop music, jazz, fusion, lounge music. It's just the most ridiculous sort of tasteless mishmash of stuff, you know. But it's just got some tremendously catchy songs on it. That's what I always loved about it. It's more poppy. It's got a real pop vibe to it, you know, tracks like Just Like Paradise and Perfect Timing on side 2. I mean, they're really, you know, precision tooled pop songs, really. And when this came out, it was just when I was starting to get into hard rock and I was listening to Tommy Vance every Friday night, you know, the Friday Rock Show. And to me, this album just totally takes me back to those days. And it's still one that I play to this day. This one I finally picked up, I think, last year. And it's good, but it's never going to mean as much to me as Skyscraper. So I guess that's quite an interesting example of where you can kind of hear that the famous one is probably the right one in terms of the critics' choice, but the favourite one will always be the one. If you haven't heard Just Like Paradise, check it out. It's a classic 1988 MTV style, bombastic, ridiculous, over the top sort of rock pop song with all this screaming Steve Vai guitar on it. And yeah, I just love it. I used to drive around Lancaster here when I was a student. I had a Citroen 2CV, and me and my friend Phil, we'd roll the roof back and we'd drive around in the summer, you know, blasting that record on cassette. It's always had a special place in my heart. So there we go.
Okay.
David Roth.
Well, my next choice is very, very self-indulgent. And it's this here. It's the Kinks and Preservation Act 2. This is a double album. It's one of his concept albums, where it's all just basically about a corrupt government, and this power to the people socialist movement takes over the government, and that's basically it in a nutshell. Now, you will never find any of the songs off this on any of the Kinks' greatest hits, because none of them would fit. It's not as melodic as any of their big hits like Waterloo Sunset or Sunday Afternoon or Lola or whatever. But there's something about this album I absolutely love. It's long, it is quite elongated. There's some of those little spoken word introductions and announcements and so forth. But I think it's fantastic, and it's a great listen from start to finish. There is a couple of songs that, you know, are quite catchy, like Mirror of Love has got a very Mungo Jerry feel, but that would be the catchiest on the whole album, and they had to actually remix it for a single, because the LP version, it did nothing anyway, but it would definitely have done nothing if they hadn't done something with it. Nothing Lasts Forever is actually very good as well. Probably Shepherds of the Nation is the first song I heard off this, and it was on like a double RCA compilation, and it even stood out like a sore thumb there as well. But I absolutely love this. Most Kinks lists would have this Stone right at the bottom. It's in my top, it's not my favorite, but it would be in my top 10 of the Kinks albums. I think it's great. From 1974, double album.
Yeah, I've heard you talking about that record before. I have heard it years ago. I had all the Kinks albums on MP3, and so I definitely have heard that one. But it's definitely not one that I'm, you know, that I know well. So that's interesting.
I didn't like it at the start. I thought it was awful, but it's one of those that you put in the background and you don't even listen to it, but it does actually sort of creep in, and I appreciate it a lot more now. Good
choice. Right, okay, Richard. Well, I'm gonna start getting a bit heavy rock on your ass now, if you don't mind. I mean, I've already
because I go all pop on yours.
I've already done the Davy Roth. So this next one, this is a band that I've never been a fan of, to be honest with you. And I've got their famous album because to me, it's one of those records that you have to have in your collection. So it's this. Right. So this is Hysteria by Def Leppard. Like I said, I've never been a Def Leppard fan, but I do like a couple of songs on this record. And it's one of those ones that you sort of have to have. But earlier this year, I remembered in my collection, I have this album. This is On Through the Night, which is their debut. Now, this is possibly the most underplayed record in my collection. I bought this when I was, I think, probably 16, and I'm now 50. I turned 50 this year, and I don't think I'd listened to this record since I was 16. When I pulled it out, I thought, my God, this is like another lifetime, you know. And I listened to it and I really enjoyed it. It's totally different to the Def Leppard that you know, the MTV, Mutt Lange. Have you heard it?
I haven't, no.
Right.
What year is it, James, out of interest?
It was probably 1980. Yeah, 1980. So you've got the original guitarist, Pete Willis. Obviously, it's before Rick Allen, the drummer, had his arm chopped off in the accident. So he's playing a proper drum kit. He's not playing an electronic drum kit. And the music is quite progressive. It's almost sort of, it sounds a bit like early Yes in places. It's got a real progressive sound to it. Great playing, great energy. You know, the songs are all really focused. You can definitely hear why they got a record deal. And it's quite an interesting album in the sense that it's like a parallel universe Def Leppard. If certain things hadn't happened, you know, if the lineup hadn't changed, if the guy hadn't lost his arm, if they hadn't hooked up with Mutt Lange, what sort of band would they have turned into? And if the house was burning down, I would let Hysteria burn, and you know, I would definitely keep that one. I still wouldn't say that I'm a big fan of Def Leppard, but I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed it when I pulled it out, and I was thinking, you know, to have not listened to it for, you know, however many years that is, since the age of 16, crazy. So I'm going to try and keep it in circulation now, having finally pulled it out again. But it was just totally immaculate, you know. I pulled it out and I thought, I've not listened to this since I lived with my parents.
That would have been around the same time that they played Reading. and they came on after Slade, who replaced Ozzy Osbourne.
Right.
And apparently they sank without trace because Slade blew them off the stage. I don't know if that's true, and somebody who knows about it can put it in the comments below. But yeah, I think Def Leppard were actually on the bill that time that Slade came back.
Yeah.
Okay, well, mine is a big hit album, but it's regarded not as their best and not as good as their previous big hit album. I'm going full pop here. Adam and the Ants, Prince Charming.
Okay.
This came out in 1981, and I wasn't really an Adam and the Ants fan. I loved Kings of the Wild Frontier, but by this time, Prince Charming and Stand Deliver, it was for the teeny boppers, really, and I was too cool to like them. And I remember the very first week, the week before this, Queen's Greatest Hits came out, and I think got to number 2 in the charts. And I thought, damn, because it's not going to get to number 1 because this is coming out.
Yeah.
The next week, well, that week came and Queen jumped up to number 2 or number 1, and this stayed or entered at number 2 and stayed there. So it never got to number 1, which is a shame, because if you actually listen to this, this is nearly as good, not quite as Kings of the Wild Frontier. It's an absolutely fantastic album with 3 big hit singles, although the third one, Ant Rap, which is the first time I've ever heard rap, had to be remixed because they couldn't release it like this. They actually had to add a bit of a guitar part to it. But side 1 of this is perfect with Scorpios, and then the Planet of the Apes and Stand Deliver, or Prince Charming, 5 Miles Out, or 5 Guns West. Sorry, I'm reading this without, there's no track listing here, so I'm only going by memory here. And that Voodoo, fantastic Adam and the Ants album. And even side 2 is not bad either, with the big hit Stand Deliver. And it finishes off with Sex, which is a fantastic song. But yeah, I absolutely love this. It was rushed, and it sounds a little bit rushed, but the more you listen to it, the better it gets. And this is up there as one of my favorite albums of 1981. So Adam and the Ants, Prince Charming.
Good stuff. I do have that on vinyl, and I've got Kings of the Wild Frontier as well. I need to revisit them. I was never an Adam and the Ants fan, at school back in the day. Different reasons. I don't want to go into them now. It's probably more of a thing about which kids in the class liked them. I mean, you find crazy reasons not to be into music, don't you, when you're in your school?
I was, and then I wasn't during that period. But then the single Friend or Foe from the album that came after that just turned me into a fan. And then Puss in Boots, I absolutely adored. I said, sod it, I'm an Adam Ant fan and I don't care, who knows?
Okay, marvellous. Well, it's good that you're delving into the old 80s pop. I'm going to go very 1980s again now, but I'm going to stay on the hard rock pitch just for one more record, and then I'm going to go pop as well. This is Whitesnake 87. Now, have you heard this one?
I've heard the singles off it. Is this Love or?
Yeah, you've got Here I Go Again, Is This Love, Still of the Night. I mean, this was their absolute monster MTV album, which came out in 1987. It was the one where they all started, well, Dave Coverdale in particular started doing the blonde hair and just all the, all that kind of stuff. Now, I was never a Whitesnake fan really, but I did get this album at the time because I was 16 at the time. I was into hard rock and all that. I was reading Kerrang magazine, so therefore it was just one of the ones that you had to get. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I went to a garage sale or somewhere, I can't think where now, and I picked this record up. This is Ready and Willing.
Mm-hmm.
And I must have bought it for about £1, 1980. There's the snake on the back. And I didn't listen to it. I just put it on the shelf. I thought to myself, well, that was a nice, cheap and cheerful. Didn't really listen to it. And then I think it was last year, I pulled it out and I put my headphones on, put it on, and it just blew the top of my head off. I'd always known that Whitesnake had this prehistory where they were a kind of blues band, really, a kind of hard blues band, hard rock band. But I don't think I appreciated quite what the difference was between that incarnation and the later kind of MTV boomy drums and all the big, it was totally different. It's very, very hard driving, very sort of heavy, a bit like Thin Lizzy in places, but they just sound like a fantastic club band. And there's some tracks on it which are just absolutely fantastic. And I just listened to it all the way through, and it genuinely, knocked my socks off. And it was just one of those great instances where you've had a record on the shelf for so long and you haven't listened to it, and then you just you play it and you think, bloody hell, what a fantastic album, bought for £1, you know. Now, I don't know much about Whitesnake in terms of the rest of their catalogue. I've got no idea, but I think the 1987 incarnation, as far as the public's awareness of Whitesnake is concerned, that's still where most of the public, if they think of the word Whitesnake, they'll think of the MTV Whitesnake, they'll think of that period. They won't necessarily think of the you know, the 1970s, early 80s blues rock incarnation.
You see, if you had asked me about Whitesnake in the 1980s, I would have said a heavy rock band, because David Coverdale, he was in Deep Purple for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
So I automatically assumed Whitesnake were a really heavy band. So whenever I heard the singles from that, I thought, oh, they toned it down a little bit, because I thought, you know, too heavy for me. I'm not touching it. But I do like the singles off that previous album, I have to admit, but I've never bought the album.
Yeah.
Never bought the singles either.
I think you would enjoy that record because it's very stripped to the bone. It's quite basic club rock, hard rock, but yeah, it really, really does pack a punch.
Right, my next choice is my favorite album by this band. Now, this band is one of those that you either love them or hate them. If you're in the mood for them, they're brilliant. If you're not in the mood for them, they grate on you. I compare them a lot to XTC because that's a similar type band. Either love them or hate them. And it's Talking Heads.
Ah, okay.
It's my favorite album of theirs, and it's more songs about buildings and food. I think you call it. It's their second album. I think this is their most accessible album. There's no huge big hits off it. The most famous song is the cover "Take Me to the River," which is grand. But things like "Thank You for Sending Me an Angel," it's only 2 minutes. It opens the album. It's absolutely brilliant, and the live version from the Stop Making Sense extended CD is brilliant as well. The other big one here would probably be Found a Job, which is on the extended version of that live album as well. Absolutely brilliant. I find it the most accessible. There are jerky rhythms in it, the way they would go with the next few albums, but there's a nod back to the punk as well. So it's one of those bridge albums, and I think it really works extremely well. And then the very last song, I think it's called The Big Country. Yeah, it's not really a country song. It just pulls everything down and finishes off really mellow. I think it's a fantastic album, and it is my favorite of their albums. And again, it's not, people never have this last, but they never have it first either. Yeah. But it's number one for me.
I'm assuming it's pre-Eno, isn't it, that one?
Yeah, this is, came with the next one, Fear Music.
Yeah. So, I do have that album. In fact, I did revisit it last year. I nearly put the Talking Heads in. I was going to put Telling Stories in, which is an album I really enjoy. I mean, I guess the famous one for the Talking Heads is Remain in Light, isn't it? That's the one that people think of as being
that's the big one, but I think it's slightly overrated.
Yeah.
I think Fear Music's a better album, the one before it. But.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So this next one is the most recent spin that I have spun. And with this one, two very different albums, I think. And I think they're both good in different ways. But this is the famous one. This is Parallel Lines, which is one of the most iconic albums of the period, I guess. You know, it's got Hanging on the Telephone on it, Sunday Girl, Heart of Glass. You know, it's a very, very good collection of songs. It's all of a piece. But the one that takes me on a journey is this one.
I'm pleased to see that.
Yeah, Auto American.
Yeah, I love that album.
Yeah, it starts off with this kind of orchestral thing at the start, this kind of orchestral overture, isn't it? Europa.
Mm-hmm.
Now it does contain some great sort of club disco type stuff, but they also dabble with these other musical genres like sort of lounge jazz and just strange songs. There's a sort of strange atmosphere to this record.
It's a real mixed bag.
It is. Yeah. Now I don't know too much about the history of this, as in, was it successful? Was it seen as? I think from what I've read, some fans were a little bit.
They were disappointed in it. Yes.
Yeah.
It did well, but it did nothing compared to the previous two albums.
Yeah.
You found that after that, Blondie more or less fell apart because the next album fared pretty badly, actually. Right. The Hunter.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just got some great stuff on it. I mean, it's got Rapture on it, which is fantastic. It's great kind of disco to that. You got T-Birds, which has got an almost sort of Phil Spector-like production on it.
does.
I like the way that they really work the kind of girl group sound on this record. But what I just like about it is the diversity of it. And Parallel Lines is a great album of pop songs from the late 70s. But this, to me, is more of a complete rounded album.
I would reach for that before I would reach for Parallel Lines now and Eat the Beat.
Yeah.
I would play it a lot more than the other two albums.
I wasn't sure what you were going to say about that one, because I know that you're quite into Blondie, but I couldn't remember from any of your rankings videos.
I know I do. I've never actually ranked their albums, but I do like that one.
Right.
Okay, this is my favourite album by this artist, who I'm not a huge fan of. It's not regarded as his worst, but it's never in the top 3. And it's Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And it's Devils and Dust from 2005. And now this is a very folky album, but it's extremely enjoyable. It's quite downbeat. Devils and Dust, a beautiful, beautiful opener. Acoustic with an absolute killer harmonica at the end of it. I think that's one thing. I think he's actually my favourite harmonica player over Bob Dylan even. The sounds he gets off them are brilliant. Long Time Coming is probably the most upbeat song on the album, and he sings it more in a higher pitched register. And he's not falsetto, but it's higher pitched. It's extremely good. And then you get things like Jesus Was an Only Son and Leah and The Hitter. They're all great, but they're very, very mellow. And Bruce Springsteen's a sort of artist. I like a few songs off each album, and that's it. This is really the only album, bar Born in the USA, that I love every single song. And that's why I had to buy it in vinyl, because I bought it in CD when it came out and I played it constantly. So my favourite Springsteen album is Devils and Dust.
I've just ordered his book actually for Christmas, his autobiography, which I've heard is a really interesting book, and he comes across very well in it. I mean, I'm not a Springsteen fan, but he's somebody that I've always thought to myself I should give him more of a chance than I have, because he's clearly got.
I bought a lot of his albums in the early 90s, but after I bought a CD player. And I've seen a lot of his albums on vinyl for 99p, and I picked them up as if, well, for 99p, I should have them. I may grow to love them.
Yeah.
Some of them I do really like, but a lot of them I'll never play again.